Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael, the tennis pro Byrd.
Wow, I like the sound of that, Brad. You must know that I'm foraying back into my old tennis game, and thank you for not mentioning my typewriting skills.
That's another story for another day.
Well, as a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. In today's episode, we're going to talk with a sports agent who has pivoted and become an agent for surgeons. Brad, we have been on a run this season of talking about old movies, and it's really tempting to talk about Jerry Maguire, but I'm starting to feel a little self-conscious about our age with the movies that we're picking. So do you want to hear some random sports facts according to this thing called the internet?
So that we won't go with your age statement there, but for those who don't know, Michael is older than me. But Michael, I feel like this question really isn't really a question, so do I actually have a choice?
Well, I will answer your question with this question, Brad. Do you know that Major League Baseball umpires are required to wear black underwear in case they split their pants? And this one's for our partner, Alex Tiersch. Did you know on Valentine's Day in 1990, Michael Jordan's jerseys were stolen from the visitors' locker room in Orlando, and he wore number 12 that day? He scored 49 points. Did you know that the average lifespan of a Major League Baseball is 5 to 7 pitches? And did you know that Pittsburgh is the only American city with 3 sports teams that wear the same colors? Do you know the colors?
Black and yellow. So is there an endpoint to these fun facts, if we call them fun?
One more.
Okay.
And you can't tell my daughter Alex, I've mentioned on a prior episode that she's vegan and she's still holding strong.
Nice.
She can't know this one, but it takes 3,000 cows to supply the NFL with enough leather for a year's supply of footballs.
And I guess a bunch of hamburgers too. There's a lot of jokes, especially dad jokes, that just came through all of that, Michael. But I know that's out there. I can feel it in my fingertips, but I'm just going to move forward. I want to get our awesome guest. I'm super excited that he's with us today. So why don't you please introduce him?
Our guest today is Matthew Vickovich. His social media hashtag is #SurgeonAgent. Matthew graduated from the University of Illinois Champaign in undergrad. He spent over a decade as a sports agent with guidance from his mentor, Dennis Gilbert. And Matthew now works at the Gilbert Group as a life insurance and retirement planning advisor. He uses his tools that he learned as a sports agent to help young surgeons as their agent when they are leaving training and going into the workplace. Matthew and Brad and I have both lectured to residents and fellows at schools all around the country together, and Matthew knows his stuff. And most importantly, he has his own podcast called Interview with a Surgeon and has had some amazing guests. And Brad and I have the privilege of both getting to be a guest on his podcast this season. And finally, his website is surgeonagent.com. And Matthew, welcome. And did I get all the details correct?
Absolutely. You guys crushed it. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we're excited to have you here. And Matthew, for if you're not familiar with our the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto, this season our theme is thinking outside the box, and we have these great guests, and you have a really cool story. Can you please explain to our audience, how did you become a sports agent?
I got to be honest, it all started with watching Jerry Maguire. I hate to bring that up.
Dang it.
How could I get involved in it? And the first thing really comes down to in the sports world is getting an internship. And so I started following Drew Rosenhaus, which was a pretty big name back in 2006, 2007. And I actually ended up calling him 30 days in a row. But at that time, he listed his house phone on his website. And I called him, left him the same message for 30 days. On the 31st day, he answered and he said, "Vickovich, I'm not taking any interns. Stop calling me. But if I were to take an intern, it would be you." And that's kind of where I was like, all right, let's see what we can go here. And from that on, I created my own company my senior year of college, ended up signing my first draft pick, who was a junior at University of Illinois. And that was kind of the story, how it worked out.
Nice.
Did you have a particular sport that you focus on?
I focused on baseball. It just seemed like the best opportunity to make it. There's a lot of draft picks there, a lot of players to pick from. And basketball and football is a little bit too hard, a smaller number of draft picks, and a lot of more different situations going into the draft for those type of players.
Well, tell us your coolest experience as a sports agent.
I think the coolest experience was a pitcher by the name of Noah Syndergaard. He was drafted in the first round. You guys might know him as Thor now with the New York Mets.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going into his senior year of high school. And that summer, he's only throwing like mid 80s to high 80s. And he came out mid-season just pumping 94s, 95s. Boy out of Mansfield, Texas. And next thing you know, he's hitting bombs from both sides of the plate. And people just couldn't believe that this kid who was about 6'6" just came out of nowhere. And it was a really cool experience being able to see him develop that senior year and really just take on the world.
That's amazing. And I don't think I realized that he was right here from Mansfield. That's not far at all from us.
So, so you have this great background of being a sports agent, but at some point you decide to do a little shift here and you decide to go into healthcare. What made you decide to start helping young surgeons?
Well, the story behind that is really, when I got out of the sports agent business, I came to work for my mentor, Dennis Gilbert, here in Beverly Hills. And with that, we handle a lot of insurance for A-list celebrities, TV, film, music, pro athletes, all four major sports. And then he actually works with some of the biggest plastic surgeons here in town. So through his contacts, he made a suggestion to me that he thought my personality and the way I operate would work well with surgeons. So he kind of introduced me to the Beverly Hills plastic surgeon market. And through them, I started meeting a lot of the younger surgeons, chief residents and fellows that were in town. And naturally, as I'm sure you guys know, all surgeons are connected to each other. So it started in plastics, really led to ortho, neuro, CT, and vascular. And initially, to be honest, it was just talking about disability insurance, why you need it, when to protect yourself, when to get it, stuff like that. But what I started doing was asking more probing questions. How are you preparing for your job search? How are you going about preparing for interviews? What's your elevator pitch? How do you plan to negotiate your contract? And what I came to find out that the majority of surgeons that were graduating really had no clue about that business aspect. And I thought, wow, isn't that crazy that a mid-30s professional, some of the smartest minds out there, if you compare them to a 30-year-old professional in the finance world and the legal world, they would absolutely crush their elevator pitch. And so I thought, what about if we brought the agent mentality to the surgeon market? How would that look? And that's really how it all started, and ended up really being January 2020 is when it really started happening.
And talk to us about kind of the life cycle of when you help a young surgeon. When do you become involved with them, and then kind of what it looks like when you're kind of holding their hand through that process.
So I think, as you guys know, we've done a lot of talks, over Zoom to programs all across the country. And I think from my perspective, really like your chief resident or fellow that's starting to look at the job search process. Up until then, they're really just focused on being the best surgeon possible and really patient care. But when they get to that point of thinking about the job in the real world, I think that's when the obstacles start kicking in. So for me, it's, trying to figure out where do they want to live, top 3 to 4 cities, 5 to 6 things that separates them from everybody else outside of what's on their CV, and really trying to get into their mind of what they want to accomplish. I think that the young surgeons spend so much time being the best surgeon and taking care of their patients the best way that they don't really have time to think about their future. And that transition from resident to attending is extremely imperative that they understand what they're getting themselves into. A lot of these docs come out in a lot of debt, and some of my private practice clients come out making 7 figures, their first contract. And that's a big difference in between making nothing and being in debt to that type of money. And how do you guide them in those positions? Now, we only do insurance. So our whole point is to help them out, connect them to healthcare attorneys, connect them to financial advisors and accountants and trust and estate attorneys, and really help them understand that this is a business, and that just because you're getting a job somewhere, or if you only have one job offer, you can still negotiate that. And too many young surgeons get into a position to where they get one offer from one group and they kind of freak out. And they have to understand that every move they make is a business decision moving forward.
Were you surprised by the traction that you've had now? Because obviously we know how well things are going for you right now. how quickly that you were able to tap into this source of individuals.
Yes and no. I would be lying to you if it hasn't been extremely hard work going through it. I remember that the first client that I brought on as a quote unquote agent for, or business advisor, more or less, is it took about 3 1-hour phone calls to convince the candidate to let me help him for nothing at all. And I think that once that happened, and I actually ended up getting him placed, it's a crazy story. He was an orthopedic resident at Cedars, did his spine fellowship at Harvard, contacted me late December and had no job interviews lined up. And this is, one of the top guys coming out of that class. And it amazed me. And so I ended up doing what I do best, just, doing due diligence, looking around online, asking around, asking questions, and come to find out, I ended up getting him placed with the group out of Sacramento. And it was a job that wasn't listed anywhere. And so I think that opportunity happens a lot, but this is, a candidate that should have had multiple interviews lined up, and it didn't work. And I think through him, I gained instant credibility. He started introducing me to a lot of other people. And I think one thing about surgeons is that they're very guarded and very skeptical about business people. And I respect that. But when you actually talk about helping someone out and helping their career and helping them in life, I think they decide that, that is the route they need to go in. And I think ultimately it's just making the surgeon respect the fact that they may not know everything, regardless of what they think they know. When it comes to business, it's a whole different aspect.
And we've gotten to know you in 2020. As you said, you kind of really launched this full throttle this year. And, when you shared your 31 calls a day to Drew Rosenhaus back in the day, I mean, we've seen that work ethic in you. And we've been doing this a long time. I'm about to have been practicing for 25 years. And you can see the real deal pretty quickly when you meet new people. And yeah, it does all come down to how hard are you willing to work for it?
Well, I appreciate that. It's a very kind comment for you to make. But, the way I see it is that these surgeons really give up all their 20s and majority of half of their 30s to really learn to be the best surgeons and take care of patients. But yet nobody in the market has decided to take care of them. And I think that's where I saw an opportunity. Just like how I would take care of big league ball players or even, draft picks or guys in the minor leagues, you've got to do what's right for the client. And too many times we see people taking advantage of the surgeon because they don't know what really happens in the business world. And so when you're able to actually help them out and provide real value to them outside of what you do for a business, I think that's how things start to grow. I mean, you got to keep in mind, we only do insurance. Now we do insurance at a very high level, but that's a very small piece of the puzzle here. And so I tell my clients, insurance is about 5% about what we do. The other 95% is helping guide them in their professional career, which really no one has done yet. And we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just really combining the insurance world with the recruiter world, with the sports agent world, and kind of bringing it all together in one piece.
Well, I love how you talked at one of our speeches we gave together. You even talked about, just the approach for the interview process. Kind of share a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the times that these surgeons they understand that they are who they are. And if they're coming out of the top programs, top residencies, top fellowships, they know they are top dogs. But just because they're top dogs doesn't mean that they understand how to sell themselves. And so I think it's really just going through and helping them understand what their strengths are. Now, the majority of times when I ask clients the first time, tell me how you would sell yourself, all they do is ramble off their CV. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, right? That tells me you don't know what your values really are or what your strengths are. And so I think my job as their quote unquote agent is to help guide them and understand what values they actually have, what skill sets they are comfortable with, and ultimately what type of setting they see their career being in. Now that everything's being done over Zoom or virtually for that matter, it's really difficult for a lot of these young surgeons doing interviews. They don't really understand how to properly do an interview over Zoom. Whether what's in their background, what is their tone like in their voice, what is their eye contact like, their facial expressions, all these things, they have to understand and adapt to it. And, one thing I found so interesting is that they say medicine changes every 2 to 3 years, whether it's new technology, new research, new data. But yet how a young surgeon finds a job has not changed in multiple decades. And that's something that I'm set out to change.
Yeah. And I think and definitely, again, going back to what Michael has said, I was shocked. It's like a lot of things in life when you learn, because Michael and I are involved on the other end of it, as actually once they have that contract, we're helping negotiate it and analyze it. But learning from your perspective of how these obscenely intelligent individuals had no idea how to present themselves at an interview was mind-boggling to us, and it was eye-opening in the sense of how did they not know? But if you really think about it, most of these surgeons, they have spent so many years looking at a small area of the body, trying to make sure that they're the best at taking care of that disc or replacing that knee or whatever they've done. They've never thought about looking up and what's around them. And so what I love about what you're doing is you're forcing them to open their eyes. You're forcing them to think bigger. And now a lot of people aren't doing that in the industry. And that's why I think when I say you tapped into something that didn't exist. And that's why I love the fact that you're a surgeon agent.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people are afraid to tell them, exactly what's going on or what's up. I think a lot of times they deal with a lot of medical reps that frankly are really smooching them most of the time. And I haven't really met anyone that would sit a surgeon down and say, listen, this is what you're thinking. This is what's really going on. And this is how the world works. I will give you two examples. One is that I had a client that came to me and was trying to convince me to let him use his college buddy, who was a criminal law attorney, to review his healthcare physician employment contract. And I thought to myself, how is this brilliant mind even having this question with me right now, right? Makes no sense to me, but that's what's really going on. So that's one aspect of helping them out. Another aspect was I was talking to one of my neurosurgeons who just started private practice here in Southern California. And his concern was, how do I get in front of PCPs for referrals? And my suggestion was offer to do Zoom meetings, because we know people aren't meeting in person. So I think it's just thinking outside the box and allowing the young surgeons to really realize what they have opportunities they have available to them.
Awesome. We have one more question to wrap up, and I think it'd be great if you could just kind of give, the high level of what young doctors should be thinking about on the insurance front with disability insurance and or life insurance.
I think that's a great question. And I think ultimately they need to go with someone, in my opinion, that's independent, meaning that they have the ability to offer you any products on the marketplace. Too many times I meet young clients that meet agents that are particular to one carrier, or they're considered career agents, and they're only going to sell you that product, regardless of what better product is on the marketplace. And frankly, that's not putting the client's needs first. And too many times I end up changing policies because they were sold something that they shouldn't have been sold. And it all comes down to, again, just not having the understanding of how that side of the business works. Now, I'll give you another example. One client told me he interviewed 5 different insurance agents and ended up picking one that still ended up selling him the wrong product. So it's just knowledge, just understanding, but ultimately you've got to put their needs before yours. And frankly, most people just don't do it in our business.
Wow. Well, Matthew, we're so grateful to have you on with us today on the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. We're going to say goodbye. We'll go into a commercial, and then on the other side, Brad and I will share some legal insights that we've gleaned from today's episode. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
And welcome back to the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Michael, what a great time catching up with Matthew and hearing his story about how he pivoted from solely working with athletes and then realizing there was a need and transitioning over to the healthcare sector representing these young surgeons. And this is another great example for our audience of these individuals that are out there and finding ways to think outside the box. But Michael, you and I always like to have a few other takeaways. What are some of the things that you heard Matthew say that you would love to share with our audience today?
Well, first, I'm still kicking myself that we didn't go with Jerry Maguire at the beginning.
I know. Show me the money.
That's right. I knew it was in there, Brad.
I didn't do the Tom Cruise, just like I didn't do the Jack Nicholson.
Okay. So what I love about Matthew is he's hitting relationally physicians at a point in their career before they've really had some professional advice. Historically, you and I have been their first point of professional contact. I mean, we're talking to them, and you can tell that they have no idea about the business of medicine.
None.
And so he's getting them introduced into that, and it's some stuff that is seemingly basic but so important to getting on the road, to getting a job. And it just reminds, from a legal perspective, where we always start with them. And we always start with just identifying, when you go get your job, your risk of this not working out is not being on the same page with your prospective employer. Mm-hmm. And really, if I was talking to a practice, we say the same thing. Unmet expectations is what leads to, a practice breakup, whether it's employer, employee, or of course, even worse, they're actually business married as partners. And so what we talk about with the doctors when they're coming out is you can't start to take ground on making sure you're on the same page until you know what you want. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about plan A, plan B, and it's, what if you're looking at, 5 years from now where your career is, what's your plan A? And then secondly, if that doesn't work out, or if you have an actual employment agreement that you're looking at and this doesn't work out, what's your plan B? And we know, we can have virtually the same employment agreement with two different doctors, and how we approach negotiations can be completely different. I think of just one quick example of, a doctor that is moving back to his hometown, and it's like, my dad's a doctor there, I'm going to live there, and, I can't have my plan B be that I've got to leave because of a non-compete. Mm-hmm. And we take this contract and we're going full throttle negotiating the non-compete. You take the same contract and someone's like, I'm go anywhere. I have a different objective, and we don't spend any of our negotiating equity on the non-compete.
Yeah. And again, that's why I love about Matthew is having someone help you, because, just to hear that story about him finding this great orthopedic surgeon who no one was interested in, or he hadn't had a job offer yet because he just didn't even know where his opportunities were. So that's one thing I definitely like. But going back to what you were touching, which is, one of the things we often talk about with our clients are what are the things you consider to help minimize those unmet expectations. And we have done many speeches and some with Matthew even talking about, we call it the big five, or 5 things you need to consider when you are putting together your actual contract or when you're looking at it. And the funny thing is, most people, they all concentrate on what is my comp? How much am I going to get made? I need to know, show me the money. Mm-hmm. That's what people, and then once they get that, oh my gosh, I got this great contract, they stop. They just don't move forward from there. And our point to them is, look, there's a lot more that goes into that, especially when you have these unmet expectations, because you have some expectation that something's going to happen. It was never put in the contract. And so because it's not in writing, it's not in the contract, it's not enforceable typically. We did an entire episode called The Handshake Exposed where we dealt with that particular issue, so we're not going to dive too deep in here.
And let me just add real fast on the compensation is what it looks like on the surface may not really reveal what the opportunity is.
Absolutely.
And so they think they know, but there's an eye-opening when you actually start digging into it.
And you and I know this is, we'll see this complex example and we'll ask the follow-up question, have they ever used a complex formula? And we'll ask the follow-up question, have you ever seen them use this before? And it's a new practice administrator who's trying some new fancy formula and no one can figure out how to make it work. So just because it says that's how you get paid, you really should figure that out. But the next area, you already kind of talked about covenants and how important it is to understand those non-competes, how it's going to impact your plan A and plan B. And I think one thing that it's never really in the contract, but you and I always talk to them about this, is understanding if you're going to be successful, there's one thing that you're going to have to touch at one point, and that's patience. And if you're not out there understanding that, to make money in this profession, you're going to be treating patients. How do they come to the front door? How do you care for those particular patients? These are all very important questions, and rarely, unless it's coverage, we don't really have that in the contracts. And I think the final piece that most people often overlook is the termination provisions. And the reason why those are so important, you and I seeing these people that they think they have a 5-year agreement, they're super excited. You and I spend 2 seconds looking at it, we're like, you have a 30-day agreement. What do you mean I have a 30-day agreement? Well, either party can terminate this with a 30-day notice without any problem. So you and I see it in a lot of different ways. And so, again, we're kind of flying over the high-level pieces. But that's because we want our audience to understand that, the simple stop at the comp is not where you need to be. You need to think of all those other areas. And these typically, those 5 that I just walked through, are the ones in which if you don't discuss that and you don't think about it, that's where you're going to have some type of unmet expectations.
Yeah, and we normally give our Big 5 speech can be an hour.
Yeah.
And I think we've done it even longer than that before. So there's a lot there. But if there was one way to, kind of expand on what you just said, would be to understand that you're looking holistically at your opportunity and not just singularly at your employment agreement. So think of it as, if you want to really get some good counsel on how to look at an opportunity, it's a 3-dimensional evaluation. You're looking at your plan A, plan B, you're understanding the practices perspective, and you have the contract, and you're trying to make it all fit, as opposed to a very one-dimensional, just review what the contract says. I mean, a lot of lawyers can tell you what the words in a contract say, but if you don't have that context, it's not helpful.
Agree. Well, another great episode, and we're looking forward to seeing you guys in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.